Hello science fans, bad news. The Earth's temperature briefly surpassed the critical threshold of 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels last November 2023, according to the data of Copernicus Climate Change Service. Although this was a temporary breach and does not indicate a permanent state of warming above 2 degrees, it signifies a concerning trend towards sustained global warming, raising the risk of irreversible impacts from the climate crisis. In fact, according to the recent reports by United Nations based on the climate plans of every country, we are actually expecting a 9% increase in planet heating pollution levels by 2030 instead of the target decrease of 45%. Additionally, the world is on track to double fossil fuel production instead of aiming for the limit needed to lessen global warming to just 1.5 degrees Celsius. But what will happen to us if temperatures increase to higher than 2 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels? What science was used to determine this? Before I answer these scary questions using science, let me first introduce myself to our new viewers. My name is Chona and I'm your resident Filipina scientist. I'm a researcher in the field of molecular ecology, where I work with fishers and farmers to find ways for us to still produce food despite climate change. I'm also a teacher, and it is my job to prepare my students for the challenges that the future will bring. And SHE-ensya is my science communication channel, where I talk about real-life issues that are affected by science. When the Paris Agreement was adopted in 2015, global leaders were concerned because of the increase in climate-related catastrophes attributed to the 1.2 degrees Celsius increase in global temperatures compared to pre-industrial levels. And from there, the global community decided to make a unified effort to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, with an aspirational goal of limiting it to 1.5 degrees Celsius. But why 1.5 degrees Celsius? Well, we have the IPCC to thank for that. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, conducted a specific assessment on the impacts of global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. The complete assessment was published in a report called Global Warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius, or SR15, in October 2018. The report involved a comprehensive review of existing scientific literature and the collaboration of hundreds of scientists from around the world. The report assessed the difference in impacts of a 1.5 degrees Celsius increase versus a 2 degrees Celsius increase, using various emission scenarios. It considered the pathways and changes required to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The report also discussed the impacts of a 1.5 degrees Celsius increase to different ecosystems, including coral reefs, and also to biodiversity and the risk of species loss. It highlighted the differences in these impacts compared to a 2-degree temperature increase. The assessment also explored the impacts of a 1.5 degrees Celsius increase in terms of sea level rise and how this will affect coastal communities. It provided insights into how limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius would reduce the risks associated with sea level rise compared to higher temperature scenarios. The report also examined the likelihood and intensity of extreme weather events, such as heat waves, typhoons, floods, and droughts, if we experience a 1.5 degrees Celsius increase. It discussed the potential for increased frequency and severity of these events with higher levels of warming. And most importantly, the report also outlined how we can limit the global warming to just 1.5 degrees Celsius warmer. And this emphasized the need for rapid and unprecedented changes in energy systems, land use, urban infrastructure, and lifestyle choices to limit global warming effectively. Now, during the 21st Conference of Parties, or COP21, developing nations and other low-lying countries strongly advocated to working towards just a 1.5 degrees Celsius increase because of their vulnerability to climate change impacts. These countries emphasized the severe consequences they would face even with a 2-degree temperature increase, such as increased risks of sea level rise, extreme weather events, and loss of territory. During the negotiations leading to the Paris Agreement in 2015, there was a consensus among scientists and policymakers about the robustness of the report that indicates the consequences of a 1.5 degrees Celsius warming. This understanding was incorporated into the agreement's text, which calls for efforts to limit temperature increase to well below 2 degrees Celsius and to pursue efforts to limit it to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, the IPCC special report included several steps that we can take in order to reduce the global warming event. First off, the report highlighted the need for global carbon dioxide emissions to decline by about 45% from 2010 levels by 2030. And net global carbon emissions should reach zero by 2050. A substantial increase in the share of renewable energy in the global energy mix is crucial, and it should reach about 70 to 85% by 2050. At the same time, a significant decrease in the use of fossil fuel must happen. Improved energy efficiency in various sectors, including buildings, transport, and industry, is necessary to complement the transition to renewable energy. Sustainable land practices are also crucial to limiting temperature increase. This includes reforestation, afforestation, and sustainable agriculture. But even with strong mitigation efforts, adaptation measures are still needed to cope with the impacts of climate change that are already locked in. Building resilience in vulnerable communities and ecosystems is crucial to reduce the risks associated with the changing climate. National reports conducted every 5 years indicate that the world is not on track to meet the long-term goals of the Paris Agreement. There are noteworthy breakthroughs, though, including the establishment of the Loss and Damage Fund at COP27, aiming to address climate change inequality. COP28 also saw pledges amounting to $430 million from wealthy countries, which will initially be housed in the World Bank. Efforts to cut methane emissions, responsible for over half of human-made warming, include the Global Methane Pledge and commitments by oil companies to reduce emissions by over 80% by 2030. However, experts argue that commitments made under the Paris Agreement are insufficient. Current policies may lead to a 2.7 degrees Celsius rise by 2100, far exceeding the 1.5 degrees Celsius target. Realizing this, some countries, including the US and the European Union, have increased their pledges. But even with this, we can still expect to see a 2 degrees Celsius increase by 2100. Further modeling through the Climate Action Tracker suggests that if over 100 countries with net zero targets follow through, warming could be limited to 1.8 degrees Celsius. And so, despite progress, greater ambition is needed if we are to achieve the 1.5 degree limit. An increase of 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels would have significant and wide-ranging impacts on the Earth's climate and ecosystems. According to scientific assessments, a 2 degrees Celsius increase in temperature would lead to a sea level rise of 0.2 to 0.3 meters compared to pre-industrial levels. This would result in increased coastal flooding, erosion, and salinization of freshwater resources. The frequency and intensity of extreme weather events such as heat waves, storms, floods, and droughts are expected to increase. There is a higher risk of more severe and prolonged heat waves impacting agriculture, ecosystems, and human health. The Arctic is expected to warm up at a rate approximately twice as fast as the global average, which means that the ice caps and glaciers will melt even faster. This contributes to sea level rise and has implications for Arctic ecosystems and indigenous communities. The increased stress to ecosystems, coupled with habitat loss, can lead to biodiversity decline. Many species may struggle to adapt or migrate to more suitable environments, resulting in increased extinction risks. The impacts on ecosystems and agriculture will have cascading effects on human society, including food shortages, displacement, and increasing conflicts or wars over resources. Vulnerable communities, particularly in low-lying coastal areas and developing countries, are expected to face disproportionate challenges, making the poor even poorer. But in the face of climate change, no amount of wealth can purchase immunity. The impacts of a warming world spare no one, and the privileged are not shielded by their riches when confronted with the ferocity of nature. Rising sea levels, extreme weather events, or ecological disruptions care little for bank account balances. True climate resilience requires collective action, transcending wealth and privilege, for the challenges we confront are a shared inheritance that demands a united and equitable response. But what do you think? How can you make a meaningful contribution to lessen the global warming event to just 1.5 degrees Celsius? How can we help each other create a better society so that the future generations will inherit a better Earth? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below.